Just want to give a nice shout out to our sponsors this Scajaquada September. Thank you so much to Labatt USA, to Life Storage, to the Rich Family Foundation, as well as to Lindy. So without further ado, I'm going to kick it over to our hosts today. We've got Jill Jedlicka, Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper's Executive Director, and Carrie Gallo, Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper's Deputy Executive Director, leading us today. So Jill, take it away.
Had to find the unmute key. After 2 years, you would think you know how to do this. Well, thank you very much, Danny. And thank all of you for spending time with us this afternoon during your lunch hour. We were pleasantly surprised and overwhelmed with the amount of interest in this webinar. So hopefully you'll take home with you a few little new factoids about Scajaquada, but more importantly, you'll be inspired to kind of work with us to make sure that this creek system gets restored and becomes a thriving component of our community as well. So again, my name is Jill Jedlicka. I am the Executive Director here at Waterkeeper. And my colleague Carrie, and partner in crime in a lot of these projects, is joining me today, and she'll be kind of chiming in with some commentary and to share some of her knowledge about what's going on in Scajaquada.
Hey everyone.
Hey, Carrie. So first of all, just another refresher about Waterkeeper. We are a nonprofit organization. We've been in existence now for, I believe it's 33 years, 33 years and 8 months or something to that extent. So it's quite a long time that we've been working to restore, protect, and connect people to our local waters in the Niagara River watershed. The Niagara River watershed is about 1,400 square miles, and we have about 3,200 miles of creeks and streams. And how we break up our watershed, first off, what is a watershed? No, it is not a shed that holds water. A watershed is an area of land where that if you put a drop of water, it would flow down into a general direction and eventually reach the Niagara River. And if you put that drop of water on the other side of that dividing line, it would then roll down and flow into another sub-basin or sub-watershed. So we define the geography for about how land manages its water and how the water runs off from land. So that's the watershed. And then we kind of break down a little bit further into what we call sub-watersheds. And that's when you have your neighborhood creeks and streams and smaller systems that all contribute to the Niagara River watershed. And today we're going to talk about Scajaquada Creek watershed. And in the image in front of you, you will see it is a small but mighty sub-watershed in our system. It's really at the heart of the Niagara River watershed, and it runs it spans about 29 square miles, so it's relatively small. The creek itself is about 13 miles long, and it starts in the headwaters of Lancaster, flows through the village of Depew, town of Cheektowaga, and then gets buried underground, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, and then ultimately flows through the city of Buffalo, where it connects with the Black Rock Canal into the Niagara River. And so that's the geography of the Scajaquada Creek watershed. Next slide, Danny. So here's a little up close and view of the map of the Scajaquada subwatershed. At Waterkeeper, we love our maps. We love to be able to put things on paper and really kind of visually express how these systems work. And it's very interesting that when you look at the Scajaquada Creek subwatershed, how different the landscape is within just that 13 miles of length. So if you look at the farthest right or the farthest east on your screen in the town of Lancaster, you start to see these smaller tributaries and these smaller first and second order streams that kind of feed into what we call the headwater and the headwater region of Scajaquada. This is where literally, in Carrie's words that she's always said, that water bubbles out of the ground. So a watershed will start where either rain falls from the sky or spring water will emerge from the ground itself. And so eventually all this water kind of flows over land and then collects into these smaller streams, and then they feed into the main stem of Scajaquada up in that eastern portion. And as it moves along through the village of Depew and through the town of Cheektowaga, you see that there's more inputs, and you'll see, more landscapes and more urbanized landscapes that it starts to approach, and you have much more runoff that happens from some of these areas. And then right around Pine Ridge Road near Cheektowaga Town Park, the creek actually just disappears and it gets buried underground. Right before that area is where the Galleria Mall is. And historically, the Scajaquada Creek watershed had about 60% more wetlands in that area before the Galleria Mall was built. When the Galleria Mall was put in, we lost a significant amount of wetland habitat in Scajaquada Creek, and there was a lot of management that had to happen with that water that was in that wetland complex. And then what resulted in was known as a flood management project or flood control project implemented by the Army Corps of Engineers. And if you've ever driven along the 190, that's the 190 or the 90, and by the Galleria Mall, and you see these wide open expanses of mowed lawn, that's a flood management control project. And that's something we're going to talk about as well. So just past that near Pine Ridge Road, now the creek is buried underground for about 3.5 miles until it pops up again miraculously in Forest Lawn Cemetery. And it flows through the cemetery, which we have just completed some major restoration work, which Carrie will talk about in a little bit. It goes underground again for, around Delaware Park and near Marcy Casino, and then pops up again, and then eventually connects in the lower section through the Black Rock Riverside area and connecting to the Black Rock Canal. So this is a very strange route for a creek, and it also poses some major challenges for its restoration, but we can talk all about that. Okay, next slide. So this is a picture of our creek. This is known as the Scajaquada Drain and the Scajaquada Tunnel. And you'll hear those terms sometimes interspersed and sometimes they get confused. But there's actually two different built infrastructure systems that kind of overlap and collide and connect and how this creek is routed. So as I mentioned, around Pine Ridge Road, where the creek then goes underground, that is where that big kind of trapezoidal shaped tunnel then starts forming. And so this tunnel is literally tunneling 3.5 miles of the creek underground under the East Side community and into the Forest Lawn Delaware Park area. The reason it was buried underground was because the creek was so polluted that the best decision in the early 1900s was to bury the creek rather than clean it and restore it and deal with the pollution inputs. So some 100-year-old decision that we're still living with today. So that's the tunnel. And then you've got that pipe on the side, sorry, Danny, on that site, that is the Scajaquada Drain. And the Scajaquada Drain is actually connected to the combined sewer system that both Cheektowaga and the city of Buffalo feed into. So when we have a combined sewer overflow event, when we have so much rainfall that stormwater and wastewater can't get to the sewage treatment plant, oftentimes our systems are triggered to overflow into our local waterways. And hence in Scajaquada, this is the drain that, this is one of the CSOs, I think it's number 55, that discharges into Scajaquada Creek during wet weather events. Okay, next slide. So this is our beautiful Scajaquada system, roughly around the 1940s. You can see on the right, you'll see the Buffalo History Museum, you see Elmwood Avenue, you see what was a widened section of the creek, which is now known as Mirror Lake, and just at the bottom of the picture is what's now known as Hoyt Lake. Hoyt Lake and Mirror Lake actually were not actual lakes originally. They were just parts of Scajaquada Creek that were widened both naturally and artificially. And over time, a lot of our human-built infrastructure has redirected and impacted our waterways and our natural systems. And if you look carefully, you go to the next slide, you'll see the 198 and what the construction of the 198 did to our creek system. And Dan, if you just want to flip back real quick to that previous one, keep an eye on that Elmwood Bridge up in the top right corner, and you see the water. And now flip to the next slide and look what happened to our creek. So that was a major, major impact, the implementation of that 198 corridor to our water system. And it is also an obstacle that still exists to this day to have true restoration of our creek. Next slide. Here's just some more classic historical photos of the process of burying the creek. It's unfortunate and disappointing that at one point, the east side of Buffalo was a waterfront community. And because of the pollution problems, the decision was to bury the creek and forget about the problem and no longer allow a waterfront community to exist. So that's definitely an injustice that we are still dealing with today. Okay. So we have this history of a waterway system that has been adapted and modified and buried, and the hydrology has been altered. Its floodplain has been filled in, and it's no longer connected to parts of the stream. We have ongoing sewer overflow problems that are happening, which are being dealt with, very slowly and steadily. The Buffalo Sewer Authority and town of Cheektowaga are dealing with that problem, but it is still a problem that exists to this day that we're dealing with. A lot of ongoing issues with litter and marine debris that we find in a lot of our creeks and waterways. And then we have what I refer to as our industrial hangover. And we see our industrial hangover pop its ugly head once in a while in the Outer Harbor, in the Buffalo River, up in Niagara Falls. And unfortunately, in Scajaquada Creek, it happens occasionally as well. Some of you might have seen the news a few weeks ago that the DEC had issued an emergency order for cleanup of some coal tar that had been leaching out of the groundwater and out of a pump station into the creek. This is unfortunate, but it's not unexpected because of the industrial legacy of this, especially the mouth of Scajaquada Creek near the Black Rock Canal. The DEC has been doing a wonderful job of managing and trying to clean up those brownfields, abandoned brownfields, dealing with known polluters and unknown polluters. And they can only tackle the problems as they come around and as they're kind of investigated. So that is a cleanup that's in process right now. We do ask and folks to share the word that we recommend that people do not come in contact with that water, and do not, in particular, they do not fish and consume fish from waters in the mouth of Scajaquada, just because the chemical constituents that are in that material could pose a threat to human health and the environment. So that's happening as we speak. But there's also plans in place to deal with sediment cleanups and restoration in the coming years. Okay, so next slide. So ongoing pollution issues, we talked about this. We have the sewage overflows. We have a lot of stormwater runoff. I mentioned how we're no longer connected to our floodplains and we're not allowing water to flow into the ground naturally like it should in nature. We've tunneled it, we've piped it, we run it over parking lots. And when it does that, it picks up all sorts of stuff from the ground. It picks up litter, garbage, you name it. And this is unfortunately some of the stuff that we see regularly after heavy rain events, in particular in the spring after heavy snow melts, when things have kind of accumulated in snow and then the snow melts and then voila, it's all still there. This is not the picture of an idyllic waterfront community. And it's something that, we've been working very hard for decades, and also working with the communities to make sure that we can protect and have healthy waterways as much as possible. So next slide. Oh yeah, this is I think Danny called this her love-hate relationship with this photo. So we like it because it definitely demonstrates, the ongoing issues that we deal with. This is the creek itself where it's about to go back underground near Hoyt Lake in Delaware Park near Marcy Casino. So if you've ever seen and you've ever walked around Hoyt Lake and then there's that stretch of creek that's separated by a berm, this is where it goes, and it gets the trash rack is there, it's doing its job to collect as much as possible before it goes underground and goes further downstream. But it does require a lot of maintenance from the city of Buffalo, and they can be cleaned out one day and then you get rainfall and the next day it's just all filled up again. So it's not a sustainable way to manage pollution in your waterways, but this is just an example of one of the problems we continue to deal with. Next slide. Okay, enough doom and gloom. So we want to talk about the positive work, because at Waterkeeper, we are all very hopeful, we are really optimistic, and we come to work every day to solve the problems, not lament about how horrible the problems can be and how frustrating they can be. And one of the things that we say to ourselves is we want to do for Scajaquada Creek what we did for the Buffalo River. And it makes sense to us, but sometimes other folks are like, okay, well, explain that more. What does that mean? Well, it means that, when you commit to restoring a waterway, it's not something you get done in 1 year, in one administration, in, one financial quarter. It's for the long haul. And you really have to look at this as almost a decades-long investment of time and energy in order to make it happen. For the Buffalo River, for Waterkeeper, our organization was founded in 1989 out of the remedial action plan process that was put in place for the Buffalo River. And it took a good 33 years of advocacy and work and collaborations in order to really achieve the success and the hundreds of millions of dollars that are going into that restoration into that river. With Scajaquada Creek, it's the same story. We've been at this probably for at least 10 to 15 years now, if not longer, with some of the founders of our organization had also started to work on Scajaquada Creek. And we are seeing incremental process, and we are seeing incremental successes. And that's what happens is you have those small successes along the way and you build upon them. We can't approach a watershed or a creek or restoration project and say, man, this is a really hard problem and it's so large and it's so, mind-boggling. I'm just going to ignore it and go away because I can't handle that, or it's just too complex. What Waterkeeper does, and we do it with all of our different collaborations and partnerships and funding support, is we start to pick away at some of the, either low-hanging fruit or some of the problems that are known that we can wrap our arms around. Because we've learned with the Buffalo River restoration, if you can even make some of the smallest successes of implementing a pocket park here, completing a study or analysis here that we didn't know before, all of that starts to pile on, it starts to build up, and you got that snowball effect. And eventually you get to a point where you've had enough success that you now have gained the confidence and the trust within the community and with leaders around you that, yes, we can do this. So it is worth investing even more. It is worth prioritizing this creek system because there are advocates there. There is studies there. There's information there that it can be taken seriously and we can make progress on it. So that's what we're attempting to do with Scajaquada Creek. There's a lot of moving parts with this. There's a lot of agencies and entities that have different jurisdictions. With the Buffalo River, it was a little bit different because Waterkeeper had the authority and still does for the last 20 years at this point to oversee a remedial action plan, which gave us the more authority. For Scajaquada Creek, there is no owner. There is no remedial action plan coordinator for Scajaquada Creek. It's just very disparate with the different agencies dealing with their jurisdictions. So what the role that Waterkeeper is trying to play within Scajaquada is try to be like this ad hoc coordinator to make sure that agencies are talking to each other and funders are aware of what's going on and what needs to be invested in, and the science is kind of catching up with the information that is out there. And it's something that it's a little bit more of a struggle because there's not as much dedicated funding for that or dedicated political will for that, but it's something that we continue to chip away at. Next slide. So just a little bit of a focus so you can get to know and love the Scajaquada Creek. If you know you're from Buffalo, you can say Scajaquada, but even we mess it up sometimes. The different parts and the different challenges that we're dealing with. So here's the lower Scajaquada Creek, and I love this aerial overhead on the left, which really demonstrates what is lovingly referred to as the spaghetti of the highway infrastructure as it overlaps and integrates with the creek. There are sections of the creek that are have pilings from overhead highways where the stormwater from the 198 and the connections to the 190 actually discharge directly into the creek. No filtration, no treatment, nothing. So anything that comes off a car, anything that's in a roadway, it will get washed down that road and it'll get washed down a tube and it mysteriously goes away. But in this line of work, we know that things don't go away. They just go somewhere else and they collect elsewhere. So when we've done our cleanups, the mouth of Scajaquada in this section is usually one of the worst sites that we have just because it's downstream from everything. So this restoration is also the area where there's some of the brownfield issues with the past industrial sites and the groundwater contamination. So there's still a lot of work and a lot of science that has to be done in this lower section of the creek, but it is in progress and things are happening, whether it's not highly visible, just to let you know that it is happening. Okay, next slide. So one of the key things when we talk about doing for Scajaquada, what we did for the Buffalo River, we've learned that there are 4 key components to that effort. And some of you might have heard me talk about this when, in the TEDx conversation and TEDx speech that they gave a few years ago. But there really are 4 key steps to waterway restoration or revitalization. The first is you have to carry a bold vision. If you, the entity, or you, the royal you, the community, don't have a shared or clear vision, it becomes very challenging to kind of communicate what is that you're working for and what you're hoping to achieve. And we strongly recommend that vision be bold and it be not so far out of reach where it's not possible, but it's definitely putting out there that we can do things differently. We can think differently about our waterways. For the Buffalo River, early on in my career and many of my colleagues' careers, we were laughed out of the room when we would come to meetings and talk about restoring the Buffalo River. We were told that we're crazy, there's other priorities. This is not, it's too expensive, it's too difficult. But we set forth and we continue to hold that vision. And lo and behold, that vision is now becoming a reality and is being shared by so many other folks within the community, public, private, and nonprofit sector. So when we employ this vision for Scajaquada, it also is not a sole vision of just Waterkeeper. These images that we're sharing, this is actually was created out of a really hard working group called the Scajaquada Corridor Coalition. And this SCC for short is made up of many different institutions and nonprofit groups and leaders in the area who worked for years to really talk through what this vision could be. So this is a community driven vision that has culminated into saying this is what is possible for Scajaquada Creek. This doesn't necessarily mean that this is going to happen because it relies on a lot of decisions coming with the 198 and transportation infrastructure, but at least we put something out there together, but we show what is potential and what is possible for lower Scajaquada. That lower left-hand corner is the Black Rock Canal, and then the creek itself upstream, and that's imagined without a 198. On the right side of your screen is actually the Buff State campus, and on the left is kind of that Tonawanda Street corridor and some of those revitalized brownfield areas down the line. Okay, next slide. This is one of my favorite slides and renderings that have been created by the SEC, and it is reconnecting Buff State College to make it a waterfront campus. Right now, Buff State is cut off from Scajaquada Creek, like so many other entities and institutions and organizations, by highway infrastructure, by road infrastructure, by brownfields, by the former car impound, what have you. But again, rethinking that if we just think of our infrastructure a little bit differently, now Buff State College can become a waterfront campus, and you can imagine how that contributes to the life and a really a thriving campus environment and the community. Going forward. The middle of Scajaquada is problematic, and that's using that term lightly. So again, in roughly in the 1920s, there was a public referendum put out to vote, and the people of Buffalo at the time voted that the creek must go. It's one of my favorite quotes of all time in dealing with this environmental work. The creek must go. Not that we deal with our pollution, not that we stop polluting, not that we clean up the pollution. It's just the creek must disappear and it must be buried and it must go. Which resulted in that, on the right-hand side, that's a front picture of that drain and tunnel combination. And on the left-hand side, that's Scajaquada Creek, or what was the route of Scajaquada Creek through the east side. The creek is now underground. And it's very interesting that throughout the east side of Buffalo, and I was fortunate enough to participate in a bike tour a couple of summers ago. And I think Greg Stevens might be on this. Hi, Greg, in case you're here watching. He hosted a bike tour for a lot of folks to actually cycle through the east side to where that path of Scajaquada Creek used to be. And until you actually get out there physically and tour it yourself and see it, you can see how communities and neighborhoods were cut off and cut up, and where the creek would have naturally flowed, which is now a bunch of these pocket parks and sidewalks that are kind of, some are in good condition, some are not in good condition. So, but the path is generally still there. Whether or not we can, what's called daylight the creek in future generations is still an open question, because there's health considerations, there's infrastructure considerations. The largest consideration is, what does the community want? The community needs to be engaged to say, yeah, sure, it would be great to, unearth a creek, a clean and healthy creek system. But is that going to create more divisions for neighborhoods that are unified through some of these pocket parks? We don't know. It's not a decision for Waterkeeper. It's not a decision for any one entity. It's a community-driven planning process that has to happen to see if it is possible or even feasible. Okay, so now we go into Upper Scajaquada, and it's repairing the headwater areas. On the lower right-hand corner, you actually see the complex of the Weldon Galleria. And then you see it's a 90, not the 190. This is why I never give any directions. The really big highway that goes along the Galleria Mall on the right-hand side. And then you see a lot of mowed lawn and grass just to the left of that. of that highway infrastructure. That is what used to be part of that wetland complex, that acreage and dozens and dozens of acres of Scajaquada wetlands. And then you see the path of the creek, and there's lots of straight lines and turns and unnatural in our minds and our eyes routes of what this creek is. That's because the creek itself was channelized artificially to get water away from the mall and away from the parking lots and away from those communities as quickly as possible and as neatly as possible. But by doing that, we've disrupted the natural cycle, the natural water cycle and the hydrology of the area. So, when you can manage the water from a flood perspective, but that is also going to have consequences to the ecosystem health. I think there's one more photo after this. Yeah, so here you've got, here's just a little snippet. Here's a cocktail party snippet. Creeks and waterways generally do not run in straight lines. Water and Mother Nature do not want that. They want to meander. They want to flood and overtop their banks. They want to meander so much that eventually those things, those oxbows will cut themselves off and then re-straighten. And, creeks just want to move. Water wants to move. It doesn't want to be channelized. And when it's channelized, a lot of times good things are not happening, from the water quality, from ecosystem health, and also the public and the community enjoyment of the water. You've got these amazing communities, suburban communities surrounding this straight edge creek. You've got a park system along a straight creek. But when you actually walk through that park system, again, you've got a trapezoidal shape of mowed lawn. It's not a desirable asset in a public park setting or within neighborhoods. So it's just a combination of really bad decisions that we're living with today. Next slide. All right, I promised I wasn't going to depress everybody, but so here's the final promise on this. We're going to talk about, a major highlight and major success that we as Waterkeeper and our team and our partners were able to accomplish in Forest Lawn Cemetery. This is primarily responsible for this is Carrie Gallo. She was the champion and overseer of this work for many, many years. And she can share a little bit about the story of, what happened at Forest Lawn, why we chose this creek system here and this restoration project and what we're seeing right now. So I will hand it over to you, Carrie.
Thanks, Jill. So I get to talk a little bit about our success story here in Forest Lawn. And one of the things that I really like about this project is, we had several goals. So one, of course, we had ecological restoration first and foremost as a goal, but we also wanted to have this project serve as a catalyst for the community in terms of inspiration for what could be done in the name of ecological restoration, and also an opportunity to give people something tangible that they could connect with and then have that sort of light bulb or watershed moment to say, oh, that's what ecological restoration looks like. And if we can do it in Forest Lawn Cemetery in the middle of the city of Buffalo, in the middle of one of the most polluted creeks in our urban core, we can probably do this just about anywhere. And so for me, that is the true, Jill talks about having bold vision and seeing that come to fruition. So I think that this project really embodies that. And if you ever get a chance to go to Forest Lawn and walk there, take a nature walk, just see some of the amazing history, culture, and now the ecology, I would encourage you to go see it for yourself. So just a little bit about this project. Back in 2013, we had an opportunity as Waterkeeper. Oh, that's a great picture, thank you. We had an opportunity as Waterkeeper to share in the cost of ecological restoration with the Army Corps of Engineers, Forest Lawn Cemetery, and the Olmsted Parks Conservancy. And so, how do big projects like this happen? Well, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how. And Jill also mentioned the word snowball effect. So this project is also a tale of snowball effect. So those main partners that I just mentioned were able to sign on to a cost share agreement under one of the Army Corps of Engineers continuing authorities programs. And so what that did was, when we were able to bring $100,000 of state investment to the table, it unlocked matching federal funds that were able to be put towards study of the entire creek within Forest Lawn Cemetery, big, bold vision setting, alternatives analysis, and ultimately design plans. So at the end of this process, we had a complete set of design plans and alternatives for what were the possibilities to restore the ecology and hydrology of this creek. If you're looking at this photo, you can see that there is a wall that lines the whole creek. So that channelization that Jill was speaking of. And there is absolutely no meandering. It is absolutely straight and no curves at all. So one of the things that we wanted to do was put some sinuosity or curvature or meander back into this creek. By doing that, we were able to think about helping direct some of that sediment that right now is being channeled really fast when it rains, really fast when the flows are high, directly downstream until it hits a wider part of the creek. And then it just drops out and becomes one of those mucky, icky, yucky, stinky islands. So we wanted to fix that. So we took down 2/3 of the height of this wall, and we were able to reconnect the creek with its floodplain. So that big grassy area that you're looking at. Yep, this is an after picture, and in the creek, you can't really see, but we put these, they look like little pinball machine structures to get the creek to kind of move, if you will, zigzaggy through the channel. So not only is this new space beautiful to look at, but it also provides flood storage. It helps to filter some of those pollutants. When the creek now overflows its banks, it can sit here and be held for a little bit and slowly infiltrate through the soil. So we get a little bit better water quality as it's moving down through the system. And then, do we have a picture of the S-curve section? No, okay, we'll just go back to that for a second. So many of you may have walked through Forest Lawn in the section that's also closer to the Delaware S-curves. So in that section, again, talking about that snowball effect and that catalyst effect, as we were wrapping up our initial designs, we were able to secure the interest of private philanthropy, additional state funding, additional federal funding, and a massive investment from Forest Lawn to think about what else could we do here. And we worked with all of our partners and were able to get additional monies to do a pretty large scale restoration near that S-curve section of Forest Lawn. So if you can go there and walk there today, you will see that what used to be a big giant flat lawn with really nothing exciting going on now has over 4 acres of wetland. Those wetlands are all spring fed. We were able to intercept some of that amazing groundwater in Forest Lawn that is Scajaquada Creek, and it's providing continuous freshwater flow into the actual creek itself as it wanders its way back down into the stream channel. I want to say that Forest Lawn should really be recognized for their first in, partnership in having and holding this bold vision. And so to give you some context, again, for how Forest Lawn has estimated that they gave up about $100 million in burial income to make this project happen. But what they get back in the name of ecological restoration and what they're giving back to the community, we were able to install all of these pathways that are there today, all of the overlooks, all of the signage, all of the educational markers. There are bridges. So now they have an amenity, now they have a destination. And Forest Lawn Cemetery, like, say those words out loud, Forest Lawn Cemetery is now giving ecological tours on the weekends, in addition to their history and cultural tours. They're able to celebrate this space, to celebrate the creek that once was kind of just a thing in the middle of the cemetery, and they're able to integrate it into their business operations. So it's kind of a cool tale, kind of a cool partnership. And yeah, I would be super happy to answer anyone's questions at the end of this that you have about the project.
Thanks, Carrie. And Danny, if you actually go 2 slides back, those images, that's that S-curve section, some of the wetland restoration, absolutely stunning and beautiful. So I do recommend, and Carrie recommends, you get out there. And I think just holding here for a moment too, I think some of the points that Carrie made, just to kind of reiterate that Waterkeeper has long held that our work and our mission is not so hyper-focused that it's just about the birds and the fish. It's about the community. It's about the health of an economy. It's about kind of stimulating other action and investment along the way. So we don't necessarily see, yes, we are environmentalists, professional environmentalists, first and foremost. We are advocates. Sometimes we, go toe to toe with people on different issues. But at the end of the day, our work, the intention of our work of ecological uplift and water quality improvements, it's all about the quality of life for humans and the environment, and for making Western New York a wonderful place to live, work, and play. So hopefully, as our work continues and our mission moves forward, we kind of get away from labeling organizations or entities as like, oh, you're just the environmental voice. Like, we're not just the environmental voice. We have an environmental lens that we look through, But there's a lot more perspective and impact that our projects have and our collaborations. And we work with, I think last count, Carrie, is like over 200 partners that we've worked with in the public, private, and nonprofit sector. Okay, so if you can move those slides forward, Danny, to kind of our strategies in motion. So what kind of comes next? This is what we're doing. Some of the stuff that's going on that Waterkeeper is doing, our partners are doing, and other folks. One of the key things to making this happen is to have that capacity to allow the community to continue to have that focused energy on the creek corridor. The creek is not going to restore itself. The agencies are overwhelmed with their current levels of responsibilities and what they have to manage. They can't be relied upon to actually restore this creek corridor. It's going to take the community. It's going to take, a bunch of other groups working together. So advocating for that support, for that capacity support to make that happen is critical. And that's where individual residents and citizens can play a role as well. Some of you may be aware of the 198 redesign process that has been underway for several years. There was a public comment period and public input period earlier this summer. We're not quite sure yet when the next iteration will come out based on that feedback. But the one thing we can be sure of, that the 198 redesign is our last best opportunity to restore the creek and the route of the creek for the next generation. So we are eagerly awaiting, and we are eager participants in what this process is eventually going to look like, because we will be able to design and implement creek restoration in cohort in the process with what's happening with the 198 as well. We are also continuing to pursue Hoyt Lake restoration. We know that the lake itself is, it's lovely, it's beautiful. It's not the worst section of the creek, but it still has impairments in its sediment in the bottom of the lake, and some of the algal blooms that we've seen there, some of the impacts to fish and wildlife habitat. So we are continuing to pursue Hoyt Lake restoration in the realm of the whole creek corridor. The Grant Street finger dam removal has been something that we have talked about for decades. I think in the office, a lot of our staff joke that like in the middle of the night, we're going to come with a blowtorch and we're just going to cut off those fingers and play ignorant on how that happened. But the Grant Street finger dam continues to be a challenge. But there is a vision to have that either removed or at least augmented a little bit, so it no longer creates the barrier that it is. Certainly working to improve public access and connectivity. We know our partners at Go Bike have been working on a kind of master plan vision for making some multimodal transportation connections and bike connections along the Scajaquada Creek corridor, connecting the east side and North Buffalo. And also, considering possibilities for what we call evocation of the buried creek on the east side. Whether or not we're going to be able to daylight the creek is yet to be determined, but there still is a lot of other ways to have that, psychological connectivity and physical connectivity to the creek itself. The Buffalo Sewer Authority is continuing its Rain Check 2.0 program. What that is a priority for green infrastructure implementation. So we know that a lot of our sewer overflows and sewer issues have to be dealt with from a traditional gray infrastructure approach, whether it's improving the weirs and the pipes and the capacity and getting things to the treatment plant that need to be. There is also a place for green infrastructure, and green or living infrastructure is utilizing the natural environment to help manage your stormwater so before it gets into the system. And BSA has been a leader on this in recent years. We've worked with them for multiple decades on convincing them to kind of go in that direction, and it worked, and now they're really running with it. And OJ McFoy and his leadership at the Sewer Authority and the pursuit of the first environmental impact bond that they worked on with the Ralph Wilson Jr. Foundation is the first in the country on having dedicated funds for green infrastructure implementation. It's an interesting financing method and approach to dealing with green infrastructure. And just from my travels within the Great Lakes Basin and interactions with other communities, there's a lot of eyes that are on Buffalo and the Buffalo Sewer Authority to make sure that environmental impact bond is having the impact that it was purported to have. So far, and so good, and we'll see some more progress now that we're coming out of the pandemic. The Department of Environmental Conservation, or DEC, is still doing and working on many brownfield cleanups in the lower Scajaquada and also at the old American Axle plant as well, which is another concern for ongoing legacy contamination. And they do have plans in place to do some sediment remediation in the lower creek. We're hoping to try and expand the footprint of the areas that they're going to deal with on that, but those conversations are happening. And then we also have conversations happening right now up in the headwaters with Cheektowaga, the Army Corps of Engineers, and we're hopeful that we're going to have some movement real soon on dealing with the studies that are needed for potential floodplain restoration. So hopefully we'll hear that soon, and we'll have some positive news to report out on that. So we will leave you with some pretty pictures because pictures can often convey the vision more than our droning on of words can. But again, carrying a bold vision for what is possible, making sure that you communicate that frequently over and over again to the community. We want to educate and engage the community to become advocates. And advocacy is not a bad word. I've said that for years with environmental work. It's okay to be an advocate. Advocates oftentimes can get the dollars, focused and dedicated to the projects that need to get done. So if you don't have solid advocacy and voices, sometimes, communities and waterways can be left behind. And certainly not on our watch, and certainly not what Waterkeeper is here for. We are here to make noise and make things happen and kind of have a clearer vision for the future. So that is it for the prepare. Oh, there's another image. Sorry. Now that is it for the prepared comments and presentations. And Danny, I'll hand it over to you because I know you're managing the chat and the questions, and we'll take them as we can get them, and hopefully we can answer some questions.